Evelyn Mayfield never asked for danger, but fate had other plans. She arrived in the dusty frontier town of Willow Creek as a mail-order bride, clutching nothing but a battered trunk and a heart full of hope. Yet before she could even say, "I do," ruthless bandits swept in like a raging storm, stealing her away into the lawless plains. With her life hanging by a thread, a single warrior on horseback thundered across the horizon. Hawk, soaring a brave Comanche, determined to defy every peril to save her. Little did they know their fates would entwine in blood loyalty and an unbreakable vow. Evelyn Mayfield's journey westward felt like stepping into a fable. She stared out the window of the creaking stagecoach as it lumbered over rutted trails, stirring up clouds of dust beneath the scorching sun. Born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, she had traded the cool breeze of the Atlantic for the baking heat of the frontier. The sight of rolling plains made her heart quake, though she tried to stay poised. She was traveling to meet her future husband, Jeremiah Carter, a man she had never laid eyes upon. Their only connection had been a series of polite, carefully handwritten letters that promised a life of stability and belonging. Upon arrival, the coach halted in Willow Creek, a modest town boasting a saloon, a general store, a sheriff's office, and a small church. The minute Evelyn stepped onto the street, she felt the curious stares of townsfolk. Some tipped their hats, while others gossiped in hushed tones about the newcomer, yet another mail-order bride, hoping for a fresh start in the Wild West. Her heart pounded at the overwhelming sense of possibility. She clutched her weathered leather trunk, stuffed with her few possessions. The dusty breeze ruffled her dark auburn hair. She thought of her mother's tearful farewell, the paternal watchfulness of Reverend James Hathaway, back home, and all the half-spoken promises of a brighter future. Now, standing in Willow Creek, Evelyn prayed that fortune, rather than misfortune, would guide her steps in this uncharted land. Jeremiah Carter stood near the stagecoach office, tugging on the brim of his hat, his anxious eyes scanning for his bride-to-be. An upright, fair-complexioned man in his early 30s, Jeremiah was not the rugged frontiersman many expected. Instead, he was a schoolteacher turned homesteader, determined to cultivate new opportunities in the West. His gentle demeanor set him apart from the rough cowhands and opportunistic prospectors who frequented Willow Creek. When Evelyn stepped off the coach, Jeremiah's breath caught in his throat. He recognized her from the miniature likeness she'd mailed a careful charcoal sketch, but seeing her in person was an awakening. She was tall, regal even, and an air of polite composure radiated from her. He approached, introduced himself with a respectful tilt of his hat, and offered to carry her trunk. "I'm Jeremiah," he managed, voice quavering with something like hope. Evelyn mustered a polite smile. Despite her nerves, something about Jeremiah's manner put her at ease. He reminded her of the gentle men back east, those who'd never quite found the courage to court her, but who possessed warmth in their hearts. She supposed she could learn to love him, or at least respect him as a good companion in this harsh world. Marriage might not always start with a spark of passion, she reminded herself, but with trust and quiet devotion, it could blossom into something meaningful. That first evening, Jeremiah took Evelyn to the local boarding house run by a robust widow named Hattie Bellefleur to grant her a place to rest. They arranged for a small wedding ceremony in 3 days' time at Willow Creek's humble church. News of the pending nuptials trickled through the town, quickly reaching the ears of all, from the bartender at the Blue Pony Saloon to the blacksmith across the street. Yet not everyone welcomed the happy news. On the outskirts of Willow Creek, roamed a gang of outlaws led by Clint Vulture Hardin, a lean, cold-eyed man who had terrorized travelers and robbed stagecoaches up and down the territory. Word had it that Hardin once rode with Butch Cassidy's old associate William News Carver, though that rumor was never confirmed. The dusty hills and hidden gulches around Willow Creek offered the perfect cover for bandits like Hardin's gang. Late that night, dark thunderheads rolled in flashing lightning across the plains. Evelyn stood by her small window at the boarding house, staring at the ominous sky. She felt a twinge of anxiety, as if the storm were heralding something far more sinister than rain. Unaware of the lurking danger, she tried to calm her roiling nerves, reminding herself that a new life required courage, faith and trust in the unknown. The day before their wedding, Jeremiah insisted they enjoy a moment of merriment at the Blue Pony Saloon. A traveling fiddler had come into town, and the saloon was hosting a small dance. The event buzzed with laughter, clapping hands, and the lively swirl of couples across the battered wooden floor. As Evelyn slipped inside, she was surprised by the warmth of the welcome. Even though she was a newcomer, the locals readily drew her into conversation, curious about her experiences back east. Jeremiah introduced her to a few acquaintances: Sheriff Wallace Becker, an imposing man with a silver star pinned to his vest, and Dr. Anne Wilcox, the quiet physician, known for her skillful healing in these rough parts. Both were genuinely happy for the couple. Under the glow of oil lamps, Evelyn found herself relaxing into the rhythm of a simpler life. She allowed Jeremiah to lead her in a gentle two-step, her first real dance in a long while. Behind the bar, old Buck Henderson, a burly ex-cowboy, shared rumors about Hardin's gang, telling Jeremiah that travelers had been robbed on the roads to Willow Creek. Jeremiah grew concerned, but tried not to alarm his bride. Meanwhile, in a corner, a figure in a wide-brimmed hat slipped out into the night, leaving no one the wiser. Had anyone noticed, they might have realized the man bore a distinct raven tattoo on his wrist, one that marked him as part of Clint Hardin's ruthless crew. In the early dawn hours, while the moon was still bright, a rider galloped into town and skidded to a stop outside the sheriff's office. His name was Ross Franklin, a local prospector who had just escaped a brush with Hardin's gang. Breathless and wide-eyed, he banged on Sheriff Becker's door, shouting, "They're coming! Bandits! A whole pack of them! Maybe 10 or more." The sheriff snatched his rifle hastily, buttoned his shirt, and summoned a few deputies. Meanwhile, Jeremiah was roused from his bed by the commotion. Without time to waste, he rushed to the boarding house to warn Evelyn. Her heart lurched at the knock on her door. She opened it to find Jeremiah, sweat beading his brow, his voice trembling as he explained the danger. Amid frantic whispers, the couple agreed Evelyn should hide inside the church. Jeremiah escorted her there, hoping the sanctity of the place might provide some measure of safety. The old wooden building offered no real fortress, but it was the best they had in such a hurried crisis. As Evelyn waited in silence under flickering lantern light, fear coiled in her stomach. She clutched her hands together, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, praying that morning sunrise would bring peace. Yet dread settled over her, like an iron weight. The bandits swept into Willow Creek like a black wind just before daybreak. They fired shots into the air, hollering and cursing as they forced their way into the general store and saloon. Some residents cowered behind shuttered windows. Others dared to peek outside, only to be met with the chaos of men kicking down doors and snatching up valuables. Sheriff Becker and his deputies attempted to make a stand, exchanging gunfire in the dusty street, but the outlaws outnumbering the law by at least 2-1, had the upper hand. Clint Vulture Hardin, tall and menacing in a battered coat, prowled the street with a calm, eerie composure that bespoke years of ruthless experience. He ordered his men to find that new bride from the stagecoach, a rumor he'd picked up the night before. A wealthy fiancé often meant a hidden stash of money or valuable family heirlooms, and Hardin intended to squeeze every dollar he could from this fresh scenario. In the midst of the turmoil, Jeremiah rushed to the church, hoping to whisk Evelyn to safer ground. But the outlaws were quicker. 2 of Hardin's men stormed the church, snatched Evelyn away, and dragged her onto a waiting horse. Jeremiah arrived seconds too late, left shouting her name in horror as Hardin's crew thundered out of town with their prize, a terrified, helpless bride, stolen away to the open plains. Bound at the wrists and tossed across a horse, Evelyn felt every hoofbeat reverberate through her body as Hardin's gang galloped deeper into the wilderness. Fear threatened to steal her breath. Her mind spun with desperate questions. Would Jeremiah come for her? Where would they take her? Would she ever see civilization again? Somewhere on a distant ridge, a lone figure witnessed the bandits' thunderous approach. Hawk. Soaring, a young Comanche warrior, crouched low behind a rocky outcrop. He had spent days tracking a stray herd of wild mustangs. Now he'd stumbled upon a scene of cruelty, an innocent woman dragged along by men with dark intent. Though the Comanche people had been pushed from their lands and faced relentless prejudice, Hawk, soaring, still adhered to the sacred code of protecting those who could not defend themselves. He mounted his sleek chestnut horse and trailed the outlaws from a safe distance, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The wind whipped his braided hair, and though he remained silent, his heart pounded with grim determination. He had lost too many loved ones to violence. He would not stand idly by, while a frightened captive suffered a fate as grim as the dust-laden horizon. The gang finally halted near a scraggly line of cottonwoods and set up camp in a narrow canyon. The place was sinister in its isolation. Rugged cliffs on both sides with only one narrow trail for entering or leaving. A battered old shack stood near the canyon wall, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Clint Hardin rode up last, surveying his men's spoils. They had stolen supplies, small sums of cash, and a few pieces of jewelry from Willow Creek. But the real treasure was the trembling woman at their mercy. Hardin dismounted and strode toward Evelyn, who lay bound on the ground. Her ankles chafed from the ropes. Her lips were dry and cracked from the harsh ride. Hardin's cruel eyes studied her like a vulture sizing up carrion. He demanded to know her fiancé's wealth, threatening to ransom her back to Jeremiah for a hefty sum. Evelyn stammered through tearful protests. Jeremiah was only a humble homesteader. She pleaded neither affluent nor connected to wealthy kin. Hardin's face twisted in anger, suspecting a lie. He ordered his men to keep her locked inside the old shack until the truth emerged, or until Jeremiah showed up with a bag of coins, whichever came first. Unbeknownst to Hardin, Hawk Soaring was hidden on the cliffside, watching every movement. His knuckles whitened on the grip of his bow. He couldn't fight the entire gang alone. He needed a plan to free Evelyn without sacrificing both their lives. Back in Willow Creek, Jeremiah was racked with guilt and despair. He had never held a gun before that morning, but now he found himself in the sheriff's office, cradling a rifle across his lap. Sheriff Becker, nursing a bullet wound in his shoulder, grimly explained that Hardin's men had likely retreated to the canyons beyond the Red Buttes, a place even the bravest trackers dreaded. A posse was forming, Yet they were short-handed, and time was against them. News travelled slow, and help from Fort Stockton wouldn't arrive for days. Jeremiah's face was etched with determination. He vowed to rescue Evelyn, no matter the danger. But even as he proclaimed his resolve, doubt gnawed at his soul. How could a mild schoolteacher hope to stand against men who killed without conscience? The memory of Evelyn's terror-filled eyes haunted him, fueling his desperation. He decided to set out before sunrise with whoever would join. Several townspeople stepped forward. Sam Lister, a wiry farmhand who owed Jeremiah for educating his children. Bill Travis, a retired cavalry scout with a knack for reading trails. And even Dr. Ann Wilcox, who insisted her medical skills might save lives in the field. Though a meager group, they embodied what little hope Jeremiah could cling to. They loaded supplies onto 2 wagons, strapped on weapons, and prayed for a miracle. Night fell upon the canyon where Evelyn languished. Inside the cramped, musty shack, she listened to the shuffle of the outlaws outside, cackling around a campfire. She couldn't stop shaking. Every creak of the sagging floorboards sparked dread that someone might come to harm her. Yet as the hours stretched on, exhaustion swept over her, and she tooled fitfully. Then in the pre-dawn grayness, a faint scraping sound stirred her awake. Her heart hammered in her chest as she turned toward the window, a small, grimy opening with shards of broken glass. Through the gap she discerned a silhouette. Before she could cry out, a gentle voice, low and calm, whispered in broken English, "Do not fear." Dark eyes, steady with resolve, peered at her. It was Hawk soaring. Using a thin blade, he began to cut through the window's rotted frame. Evelyn bit her lip to keep from whimpering. She heard one of the outlaws snoring outside so close that any noise might alert him. Inch by inch, Hawk, soaring, pried loose the rickety boards, creating a gap big enough for her to wiggle through. Her wrists were still bound, so he carefully cut the cords, motioning for her to remain silent. In that tense hush, Evelyn felt a wave of gratitude for the sudden presence of this Comanche stranger. With the faintest nod, she allowed him to guide her out of captivity, unaware that the next moments would define both their destinies. Evelyn slipped through the shack's makeshift window, aided by Hawk Soaring's firm grip. The moment her feet touched the ground, she realized the enormity of the risk. Hardin's men were sprawled around a dying campfire, but any rustle or misplaced step could rouse them. Hawk, Soaring, led her along the canyon's edge, his horse waiting behind a natural rock formation. They had almost cleared the camp when a lone outlaw, apparently on guard duty, stepped into their path, rifle half raised. Evelyn stifled a gasp. Hawk Soaring moved with lightning speed, knocking the man's weapon aside with a deft twist of his tomahawk. The guard stumbled, letting out a sharp cry that tore through the pre-dawn silence. Chaos erupted. The other bandits jolted awake, shouts echoing off the canyon walls. Hawk Soaring hoisted Evelyn onto his horse and vaulted up behind her. Gunshots cracked the air, sending plumes of dust flying. Bullets whizzed past them as the Comanche warrior urged his steed into a headlong gallop. The canyon passage was narrow, flanked by crumbling rock faces, but Hawk Soaring navigated it with the confidence of one intimately familiar with the land. They burst into the open plain, leaving the echo of Hardin's furious yells behind. Though alive and free for the moment, Evelyn's heart still pounded with terror. She clung to Hawk Soaring as dawn broke on the horizon, uncertain of where he was leading her, but grateful for every galloping stride that took her farther from the bandits. When the sun climbed high, Hawk Soaring slowed his horse near a secluded watering hole surrounded by rocks and sparse vegetation. He dismounted and helped Evelyn down. Her legs trembled from the intense ride, and every part of her body ached from rough treatment and the constant jolt of horseback travel. Still relief coursed through her veins. She was free from Hardin's grasp. Hawk Soaring gestured for her to drink. The water tasted cool and sweet, reviving her parched throat. Only after her thirst was sated did she fully observe her rescuer. He stood tall, his lean muscles evident beneath traditional buckskin leggings. Painted motifs on his arms told stories of hunts and battles. He carried himself with an air of guarded nobility that made her feel both safe and curious. With halting English, he introduced himself properly. "I am Hawk Soaring of the Nokone Comanche. You safe now?" She offered her name, voice quavering with gratitude. "Evelyn Mayfield. Thank you for saving me." Words felt insufficient, but they were all she had. He nodded, eyes reflecting understanding. Still, they both knew their ordeal wasn't over. Hardin's men might track them. The bullet graze on Hawk Soaring's arm, sustained during the escape, suggested they had only barely outpaced danger. Yet for now, the hills offered sanctuary, and Evelyn found her courage stirring once more in the presence of this unwavering ally. At dawn, Jeremiah and the hastily assembled posse set out to find Evelyn. Sheriff Becker, wounded but stubbornly refusing to remain behind, joined them on horseback, his arm in a sling. They followed the outlaws' trail of hoofprints leading southwest of Willow Creek. Bill Travis identified broken branches and a distinct pattern of horseshoes, typical for Hardin's gang, and surmised they'd headed for the canyons near Red Buttes. Anxious to make good time, Jeremiah pushed them onward, ignoring the fatigue etched across his companions' faces. Each passing hour without Evelyn felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He replayed her terrified expression 1,000 times, fueling his determination. "Doctor." Wilcox rode beside him, her eyes searching the rolling terrain. She offered words of encouragement, though she too felt the mounting desperation. Midway through the day, they spotted a stray outlaw who had wandered away from the main group. The man fired a shot and attempted to flee, but Sam Lister wrestled him to the ground. Under threat of immediate justice, the outlaw confessed that Evelyn had been taken to the canyon hideout and then promptly escaped with some Indian. This news baffled Jeremiah. Could Evelyn have found a savior among the Comanche hope sparked in him? Yet the question remained, where was she now? Nestled in a small cave away from prying eyes, Evelyn and Hawk. Soaring took a moment to regroup. Her rescuer cleansed the graze on his arm with the water they'd collected, wincing only slightly at the sting. Evelyn tended to him as best she could, recalling her mother's home remedies. She carefully wrapped the wound with a piece of cloth torn from her petticoat. In the flickering light of a small fire, they communicated through short phrases, gestures, and the universal language of empathy. Hawk Soaring explained in phrases punctuated by Comanche words that he had lost his family in a raid by white settlers years ago. Despite this painful history, he didn't see all white people as enemies. Rather, he judged individuals by their actions. Evelyn listened, her heart aching. She shared that she'd been orphaned as a young girl, her father taken by illness, her mother by heartbreak soon after, and left to the care of a church in Providence. Neither had known the love of a large, supportive family. Their common experiences of loss forged a fragile kinship. Outside, the wind howled softly, warning them of the perilous world beyond. Inside, they found a gentler moment. Two souls from different worlds united by compassion. Though they were not safe yet, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of determination. If they stood together, perhaps they could face whatever terrors waited beyond the cave walls. Meanwhile, Clint Hardin was seething. His men had failed to guard the shack, allowing Evelyn to escape, and that failure led to chaos. Several had suffered wounds in the scuffle. One had an arrow lodged in his thigh, an unmistakable sign that a Comanche had interfered. Hardin paced the rocky ground outside the shack, cursing under his breath as he contemplated his next move. His second-in-command, a hulking brute named Angus Milton, pointed out that a single Comanche wouldn't remain hidden for long. They could track him, catch both him and the woman, and extort a ransom from her fiancé. Hardin's eyes narrowed with a near-feral glint. "Nobody steals my hostage," he snarled. "We'll finish 'em both, then march into Willow Creek and take what's ours." He relished the idea of making an example out of Evelyn and her mysterious rescuer. Fear was a currency he loved to spend. He ordered his men to pack up the camp. They'd search the canyon's valleys and every watering hole if need be. By the time they were done, neither Evelyn nor that Comanche warrior would have a place to hide. And if Jeremiah Carter dared to come looking, Hardin would make sure he joined the body count. 2 nights passed. Hawk Soaring led Evelyn through winding trails in search of safer ground. He taught her to move quietly to scan the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Yet as skilled as he was, Hardin's men were relentlessly combing the area. Late on the second night, the outlaws nearly cornered them in a dried riverbed. Evelyn and Hawk, Soaring, crouched behind a large fallen tree, hearts pounding as torches bobbed in the darkness. They could hear the outlaws' coarse laughter and the jingle of spurs. For a moment, Evelyn felt certain they'd be discovered, but the outlaws, cursing their ill luck at losing the trail, moved on, leaving the pair trembling with relief. When the coast was clear, Hawk Soaring and Evelyn slipped away, forging deeper into terrain known better by the Comanche than by any white man. She began to realize that her survival hinged on his knowledge. She trusted him with her life, though she knew so little about him. Something in his calm presence reminded her of the hush before dawn, a sense that each day, no matter how dark the night, brought the promise of light. Their journey continued under the stars, guided by flickers of hope and determination. Jeremiah's posse pushed into the same rugged territory with grim resolve. They encountered stretches of desolate plains and steep canyons that threatened to break the spirit of the unprepared. Yet the group persevered. They found signs of Hardin's men, discarded whiskey bottles, cigarette ends, trampled brush, and fresh horse dung. All evidence pointed to a systematic search. On the 3rd day out, they spotted Hardin's gang from a vantage point high on a rocky ledge. The outlaws were spread out, combing the valley below, occasionally shouting curses. Jeremiah's pulse quickened. Evelyn might be close. He shared a look with Sheriff Becker, whose jaw tightened with determination. They had the advantage of surprise, but they were still outnumbered. In the distance, an eagle circled. Jeremiah couldn't help but notice the majestic bird gliding effortlessly in the wide sky. He felt a strange kinship with that eagle's watchful gaze. The thought of Evelyn alone and frightened fueled him forward. Quietly, Bill Travis proposed that they continue to shadow Hardin's men from a safe distance, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Little did they know that same eagle soared above another pair on foot, Evelyn and Hawk Soaring, whose path would soon intersect with Jeremiah's. Fate was weaving their stories together, preparing the ground for an explosive confrontation. Dusk blanketed the land with shadows when Evelyn and Hawk Soaring reached a boulder-strewn clearing. They paused to rest the warrior, scanning for any threat. Tension hung in the air. Their steps had been dogged by the sense of looming danger. Evelyn stiffened as she heard the faint jingle of tack. Hawk. Soaring raised a hand to signal silence. With slow, deliberate caution, they crept behind a jagged outcrop. Through a gap in the rocks, Evelyn glimpsed a small party of riders emerging from the brush. Her heart lurched. It was Jeremiah, flanked by Sheriff Becker and Dr. Wilcox. She nearly wept with relief, but fear stopped her short. Could it be a trap? No, Jeremiah's voice calling her name into the twilight was unmistakably real. She broke cover, stumbling forward with a cry of joy. Jeremiah almost fell off his horse in astonishment. He raced toward her arms, wide tears gleaming in his eyes. "Evelyn!" he shouted, voice thick with emotion. She collapsed against him, overwhelmed by the mingled relief and exhaustion. Hawk Soaring hung back, watchful. The group turned cautious eyes on the Comanche warrior, uncertain whether to welcome him as a savior or regard him with suspicion. In the hush of that dramatic reunion, only the crickets dared to fill the silence. Evelyn quickly introduced Hawk Soaring to Jeremiah and the others, explaining how he had rescued her from Hardin's gang. Initially, Jeremiah's posture was guarded. He had grown up hearing tales of conflicts between settlers and native tribes. But the undeniable fact remained: Hawk Soaring had saved Evelyn's life, risking his own in the process. Jeremiah offered a sincere thank you, though it came out stumbling. The sheriff, though he carried prejudice from a lifetime of frontier battles, managed a respectful nod. Dr. Wilcox, ever the pragmatic healer, insisted on examining them both. She found bruises on Evelyn's arms and welts on Hawk Soaring's torso from a close encounter with a bullet. She pressed a compress to the wound with gentle efficiency. Hawk. Soaring bowed his head in appreciation, though his gaze remained vigilant. He sensed the flickers of distrust among the white settlers, an unease forged by generations of strife. Still, Evelyn's presence eased tensions. She stood between them, bridging two worlds with her gratitude and compassion. For a brief, hope-filled moment, it seemed possible that alliances might transcend old hatreds. But each person knew that Hardin lurked in the darkness, and their fragile peace could shatter at any moment under the outlaws' ruthless assault. Gathered around a small campfire, the newly formed group devised a plan. With Hardin's gang scouring the territory, staying still would invite disaster. They needed to either outrun the bandits or stage a decisive confrontation. Hawk Soaring pointed to the north, where the high bluffs and narrow passes gave the Comanche and now their allies the strategic high ground. He suggested they lure Hardin's men into a choke point, turning the advantage against the outlaws. Sheriff Becker, though still nursing his wounded shoulder, agreed. "It's risky," he said, "but there's no sure way back to Willow Creek without crossing paths with them." Jeremiah, eyes flashing with determination, was more than ready to face the danger. His love for Evelyn demanded he stand firm. Dr. Wilcox quietly prepared bandages, fully aware that the coming days might bring bloodshed. Evelyn's heart twisted at the mention of a battle. She felt guilt that so many risked their lives for her. But she also recognized that Hardin would never simply let them go. If left unchecked, the outlaw would wreak more havoc on Willow Creek. She clasped Jeremiah's hand and offered Hawk Soaring a grateful nod. Together, they resolved to end Hardin's reign of terror before more innocent souls suffered his wrath. Before the first blush of dawn, Jeremiah Hawk soaring, and the posse set their trap. They found a narrow passage flanked by steep walls. Loose rocks perched precariously near the rim, perfect for an improvised avalanche. Hawk soaring climbed the eastern slope, bow and arrows at the ready, while Bill Travis and Sam Lister positioned themselves to trigger a rock slide when the outlaws rode through the pass. Sheriff Becker and Dr. Wilcox waited with Jeremiah and Evelyn, ready to provide covering fire. Just as the rising sun began to illuminate the canyon, they heard the thunder of hooves. Hardin's gang emerged at the far end of the pass, scanning the rocky heights. Hardin rode at the front, a menacing silhouette in the growing light. Evelyn's pulse hammered. She prayed they wouldn't notice the carefully arranged plan. Hawk soaring gave a sharp, high-pitched whistle, an eagle's cry. Sam and Bill heaved at the supports they'd rigged, sending a cascade of rocks tumbling. The earth roared as boulders crashed down, blocking the pass behind the outlaws. Startled horses reared. Guns flared in the confusion. Hawk soaring fired an arrow, taking down one bandit. Jeremiah, hands trembling, raised his rifle and fired into the chaos. At last, their confrontation with Hardin had begun in earnest. Curses and gunfire split the air as the outlaws scrambled to regain control. Several were trapped by the fallen rocks, while others managed to spur their horses through a small gap. Hardin, spotting Jeremiah and Evelyn, bellowed a furious war cry. He snapped his reins and charged toward them, revolver spitting bullets. Jeremiah dove behind a boulder, heart thudding in his chest. Dr. Wilcox winced as a stray bullet pinged off the stone beside her. Hawk, soaring, descended like a phantom from the eastern slope, letting arrows fly. He picked off two more bandits, swift and precise. One outlaw took aim at him from the side, but a timely shot from Sheriff Becker felled the gunman. The air smelled of gunpowder and dust, acrid with violence. Hardin circled around a cluster of spooked horses, eyes gleaming with pure malice. He zeroed in on Evelyn, who crouched behind Jeremiah. "You cost me a fortune," he snarled, leveling his revolver. Time slowed for Evelyn. She could see the madness in Hardin's eyes, the recklessness of a man cornered. Hawk, soaring, darted toward them, raising his tomahawk, but Hardin's gun was already spitting lead. In that heart-stopping instant, Evelyn thought she was about to die. Jeremiah hurled himself in front of Evelyn, shielding her with his body. The bullet grazed his side, tearing through his shirt in a splash of crimson. He staggered, gasping in shock and pain. Hardin laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that reverberated through the canyon. Evelyn cried out, desperate to stop the madman. Yet Hardin's triumph was short-lived. In a flash of movement, Hawk, soaring, closed to the distance. His tomahawk cracked into Hardin's gun hand, disarming the outlaw. Hardin howled and swung wildly with his other fist, landing a solid blow to Hawk Soaring's jaw. The Comanche warrior reeled. Hardin dove for his fallen revolver, but Dr. Wilcox fired her small pistol, the shot narrowly missing his leg. Summoning every ounce of will, Jeremiah raised his rifle once more, ignoring the hot agony in his side. He squeezed the trigger. The shot found its mark, slamming into Hardin's shoulder. The outlaw collapsed, cursing and flailing in the dust. Hawk, soaring, retrieved his tomahawk, pressing it to Hardin's throat, daring him to move. The dreaded vulture, Hardin, who had terrorized so many, was now at the mercy of those he had hunted. Evelyn exhaled a shuddering breath, hardly able to believe they had survived this deadly gambit. With Hardin disarmed and most of his men either dead or captured, the canyon fell eerily silent. Those outlaws who managed to flee were few, scattering into the unforgiving wilderness. Sheriff Becker secured Hardin's wrists in handcuffs, ignoring the bandit's persistent snarling. The old lawman would finally bring this notorious criminal to justice in Willow Creek, where a hangman's noose or a prison cell awaited. Evelyn hurried to Jeremiah's side, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dr. Wilcox assessed his wound, relieving some tension by stating it was a flesh wound, painful but not fatal. She applied bandages and gave him something to staunch the bleeding. Exhausted yet relieved, Jeremiah clung to Evelyn, murmuring apologies for not protecting her sooner. She silenced him with a soft kiss on his brow, assuring him that he was her hero. Hawk Soaring stood apart, nursing bruised ribs. Sam Lister and Bill Travis expressed their gratitude for his crucial help. Though his face remained composed, a quiet humility shone in his eyes. Evelyn approached and took his hand in both of hers, whispering heartfelt thanks. The bond they'd forged in danger felt unbreakable now. Sunlight warmed the canyon walls as they began packing up each step, a reminder of how close death had come, and how by unity and courage they had survived. The victorious group, wounded, weary but alive, traveled back to Willow Creek. Townsfolk rushed out to greet them, gasping at the sight of battered survivors and the infamous Hardin in chains. Hattie Bellefleur burst into tears of relief, hugging Evelyn with unrestrained joy. The blacksmith and other locals cheered Jeremiah for his bravery, though the schoolteacher only shook his head, insisting Hawk Soaring had done most of the saving. In the days that followed, Dr. Wilcox patched up cuts, bruises, and bullet wounds. Sheriff Becker arranged for a circuit judge to preside over Hardin's trial. Meanwhile, the battered town slowly returned to its routine. After much discussion, Jeremiah and Evelyn decided to postpone their wedding until they both healed from the ordeal. Yet something else weighed on Evelyn's mind. She no longer felt quite the same. Trauma had changed her, and so had her bond with Hawk Soaring. One evening, Jeremiah found her standing outside the boarding house, gazing at a pale moon. She confessed her gratitude and her confusion. She loved Jeremiah as a partner and friend. They had shared letters full of dreams. But she also felt a deep connection with Hawk Soaring, respect, admiration, and an abiding sense of safety. Uncertain how to move forward, she let her tears fall, her heart torn between two good men. While Evelyn wrestled with her emotions, Hawk Soaring found himself grappling with unexpected yearnings. His place was among his Comanche people, yet something called him back to her side. He had seen countless injustices, his tribe pushed to the margins, forced treaties broken by the government. Trusting any settler had once seemed impossible. But Evelyn was different. She met him with genuine kindness, forging a link of compassion in a land scarred by violence. Nonetheless, the tension in Willow Creek was palpable. Many locals viewed him with suspicion, some openly hostile. Names like Savage trailed him in hushed whispers, but he refused to respond with hatred. The quiet strength in his eyes spoke volumes. When Hawk Soaring visited Jeremiah at Hattie's boarding house, the two men had an open, frank conversation. Jeremiah thanked him again for saving Evelyn and admitted the swirling confusion in his own heart. He wanted to protect Evelyn, to marry her, but he also recognized the extraordinary bond she shared with the Comanche warrior. In a world that demanded black and white answers, they navigated a sea of gray. Hawk, soaring with solemn grace, replied that Evelyn must decide her path, just as he must decide his. No one could force the answer. A few days later, As the sun dipped behind the rolling plains, Evelyn stole away to a quiet bluff overlooking Willow Creek. She needed space from the town's watchful eyes and relentless speculation. She sat on a smooth rock arms, hugging her knees, her long auburn hair rustling in the evening breeze. Her mind teemed with memories of captivity rescue and the fierce loyalty she had found in two different men. Unexpectedly, Hawk Soaring appeared as silent as the wind. He offered a small, hand-carved wooden figurine of a hawk wings spread in mid-flight. It was a gift he had fashioned to thank her for dressing his wounds, a token of gratitude and a symbol of his respect. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with emotion. They spoke in hushed tones, words blending with the cicada's lullaby. He confessed that he felt drawn to remain near her, yet he feared the prejudice of the townspeople. She admitted her confusion, torn between the man she'd come west to marry and the warrior who had saved her life. As dusk blanketed them in twilight, Hawk Soaring murmured that he would go wherever he was needed most. If that meant leaving, he would depart at sunrise. If that meant staying, he would face whatever storms lay ahead. The morning air was cool, tinged with the scent of prairie grass and wood smoke, as Evelyn stood outside the old church, the very place where she had once cowered in fear as bandits stormed Willow Creek. Now it was where she had chosen to confront her own storm, the truth of her heart. She had asked Jeremiah to meet her there, and as he approached, his expression was calm, though shadows flickered in his eyes. They sat together on the church steps, the rising sun casting long golden rays across the weathered wood. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly in her lap. She had rehearsed what to say a dozen times, but the words still caught in her throat. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, but unwavering. Jeremiah, when I stepped off that stagecoach, I thought I knew what I wanted. A fresh start, a kind husband, a peaceful life. And you've been nothing but honorable, gentle, brave. He nodded silently, jaw tight. But something inside me changed during those days out there. Being taken, being rescued, it stripped everything down to the rawest parts of who I am. I faced a death, and in that darkness it was Hawk Soaring who pulled me back toward life, not just by saving me, but by seeing me, the real me. Not a bride on paper, but a woman who's still discovering who she is. Jeremiah let out a shaky breath. His eyes shimmered with grief but no anger. I think I knew, he murmured. Even before you did. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached for his hand. You didn't deserve this pain. You deserve a love that's whole, not torn between gratitude and guilt. And I deserve to follow the truth of my heart, no matter how messy or unexpected it looks. He gave a sad smile, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn, you were my dream. But dreams change. I would never chain you to a promise born before either of us knew what this land would demand of us. They embraced, both crying tears of sorrow for what might have been, and of relief for what they'd spared each other. As the morning light bathed them, Evelyn felt the weight of her indecision lift like mist from the valley. She turned her face toward the horizon, knowing now that her future would not follow the path she first imagined, but one forged by truth and sealed in fire and loyalty. Though gossip spread through Willow Creek like wildfire, Evelyn stood unwavering in her decision. The townsfolk were split. Some declared it disgraceful, whispering about betrayal and scandal over coffee and chores. Others, those who had fought beside her and seen the courage of Hawk Soaring firsthand, offered quiet support. Sheriff Becker and Dr. Wilcox, both battle-worn but wise, made it known where they stood. "A man's worth is in his actions," the sheriff told a skeptical shopkeeper. And Hawk Soaring's actions saved all our skins. Even Jeremiah, now walking with a slight limp from his wound, gave Evelyn his blessing. He returned to his schoolhouse and his small plot of land, with quiet dignity burying heartache beneath a teacher's calm. In time, he and Dr. Wilcox found solace in each other's company. Two healers of different kinds learning to live without bitterness. The ceremony was unlike any the town had seen. At dusk, with the sun spilling amber and rose across the plains, Evelyn and Hawk Soaring stood together on a grassy bluff just outside Willow Creek. They chose the place not for grandeur, but for its open sky and endless horizon symbols of the life they were building wide and unknown. There was no ornate chapel, only wildflowers and wind. A Comanche elder named Two Feathers, his voice weathered by time, offered blessings in his native tongue. Then Reverend James Hathaway, having arrived from a distant parish by special invitation, spoke gently of unity, resilience, and love forged in trials. Evelyn wore a gown of soft buckskin, intricately beaded by the women of Hawk Soaring's band. Her hair was braided in the Comanche style, threaded with feathers and bits of colored glass. Hawk Soaring wore a traditional vest, the beadwork telling a story of storms weathered and loyalty earned. A single eagle feather gifted to him during a warrior rite was tucked behind his ear. They exchanged not rings but tokens. Evelyn gifted him her mother's locket, still holding a tiny faded photo inside. Hawk Soaring gave her a carved talisman, shaped like a hawk in flight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting gold fire across the sky, they pledged their lives to each other, in words both ancient and new. The breeze carried their promises across the open land, and in that sacred moment, they became more than just a bride and a warrior. They became a bond unshaken by culture loss or fear. They became home. Time passed gently in the aftermath of that fateful summer. Hawk Soaring and Evelyn built their life together in a hand-hewn cabin on the outskirts of Willow Creek, nestled between cottonwoods and a slow-moving creek. The townspeople, once skeptical and wary, gradually grew used to the sight of the Comanche warrior and his auburn-haired wife riding into town together, always side by side. Some still whispered behind closed doors about unusual marriages and changing times, but others found themselves inspired. Buck Henderson, the gruff bartender at the Blue Pony, eventually tipped his hat with a begrudging, "Mighty fine woman you got there." The general store owner began setting aside flour and tea for Evelyn, while children often ran to greet Hawk. Soaring, drawn by his calm presence and the way he could mimic bird calls with uncanny accuracy. With Clint Hardin imprisoned and most of his gang scattered or dead, Willow Creek entered a new era of quiet stability. The scars remained, but the constant fear did not. Jeremiah found new purpose in his work and later married Dr. Wilcox. Their home became a beacon of education and healing, often visited by Hawk Soaring and Evelyn for long talks under the stars, meals shared without pretense or bitterness. Hawk Soaring never ceased to protect Evelyn, not out of fear, but from love. He taught her to shoot a bow, to read tracks in the dust, to identify herbs for medicine. He carved her walking sticks, showed her how to speak to the horses, and stood guard when winter storms howled across the plains. She, in turn, helped him record the oral histories of his people, scribing his stories so they would not be forgotten. Together, they began to travel to nearby settlements, advocating for better treatment of indigenous tribes. Hawk, soaring with Evelyn at his side, spoke not with anger, but with quiet strength, reminding settlers of shared humanity. They faced setbacks, even insults, but they also stirred conversations, ones that had never been dared before. At night, they would sit by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand in hers. In those quiet hours, Evelyn would look around their little home and feel the weight of everything they had endured and the lightness of having survived it together. Their love became legend, not because it was loud, but because it endured. A warrior and a bride, bound not by what divided them, but by what they chose to build. Side by side, they faced a future their younger selves could never have imagined, but would have been proud to call their own. And so, dear listeners, we bring to a close the harrowing tale of love, courage, and redemption on the wild frontier. From the dusty streets of Willow Creek to the sun-scorched canyons where bandits fell. Evelyn's journey led her to Hawk, soaring a Comanche warrior whose honor and protection transcended every boundary. Together they proved that unity and compassion can rise from the ashes of brutality, forging a bond stronger than steel. If you were captivated by this Wild West adventure, by its daring rescues, impossible choices, and triumphant love, please support our channel. Like this video if it moved you, share it with friends, eager for a thrilling romance, and subscribe to join us in exploring more stories that kindle courage and hope. Your support helps us continue telling the tales that inspire hearts far and wide. Thank you, and ride on.